Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, April 17th, 2023. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. In a speech at the New York Stock Exchange, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy promised a vote on a bill that will both raise the debt ceiling and cut federal spending. He also criticized President Biden for not negotiating and accused the president of misleading the public. Democrats wasted no time pushing back on Speaker McCarthy's speech, with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calling it, quote, theater, and House Minority Leader Hakim Jeffries accusing Republicans of taking the nation's full faith and credit, quote, hostage. The House Judiciary Committee was also in New York City today, holding a hearing looking at crime in America's largest city. But the committee's Democrats called it a partisan stunt aimed at amplifying conservative anger at Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. We begin with Speaker McCarthy's speech. The House Republican leader spoke for about 25 minutes. His main focus was the economy and the debate over raising the federal debt ceiling. He promised a House vote on a debt ceiling bill, but was vague about when that vote would happen.
A no-strings-attached debt limit increase will not pass. But since the president continues to hide, House Republicans will take action. Okay, so here's our plan. In the coming weeks, the House will vote on a bill to lift the debt ceiling into the next year. Save taxpayers trillions of dollars, make us less dependent upon China, curb our high inflation, all without touching Social Security and Medicare. Simply put, it puts it on a fiscal responsible path in three ways. It limits, it saves, and it grows. First, we'll limit federal spending. You know, in the past 2 years, discretionary spending in Washington has exploded by more than 17%. That's faster than GDP growth or even inflation. And keep in mind, the new spending does not include the trillions of dollars of COVID-era spending. From 2011 to 2021, the federal government operated under spending caps. Though these caps were occasionally raised through debt limit negotiations, they were largely successful. Discretionary spending flatlined and overall spending growth slowed dramatically. Our legislation accomplishes the same goal by returning the federal government to 2022 levels. And then limit the growth of spending over the next 10 years to 1% of annual growth. Now, don't believe anyone who tells you these are draconian limits. Think about it. They're the same spending levels we had just 4 months ago. Just last October. Well, that's 7 months. And make sure that our veterans and our service members are taken care of. But the bloated, overgrown bureaucracy that has expanded under President Biden needs to be pruned. And that's exactly what we'll do. If Washington wants to spend more, it'll have to come together to find savings elsewhere. Just like every single American household does every single day.
According to ABCnews.com, President Biden and Speaker McCarthy have not met or spoken since February 1st. Of course, the president has not budged on his refusal to negotiate over raising the debt ceiling. He's also rejected Republican efforts to combine a debt ceiling vote with a budget deal. Here's more from Speaker McCarthy.
You know, in the unserious proposal, the budget the president made, he wants to spend more this year than government did during the height of the pandemic. Just think about that for one moment. He wants to spend more than we spent during the height of the pandemic. House Republicans actually believe the opposite should happen. Before we borrow another dime, we owe it to our children to save money everywhere. Our proposal will examine wasteful Washington spending and executive overreach in all forms. Among other items, it will claw back tens of billions of dollars in COVID-related money. You see, House Republicans have already passed a bill to end the pandemic. officially. And the president just signed it last week. So now it's time for Washington to return to normal. The American people are tired of politicians who use COVID as an excuse for more extreme inflationary spending. If the money was authorized to fight the pandemic, but was not spent during the pandemic, it should not be spent after the pandemic is over. Now, third, we will grow the economy so we stop being dependent on China. House Republicans already passed H.R. 1, the Lower the Energy Cost Act, and it had bipartisan support. Among other things, this bill restores American energy leadership, makes it easier to build things in America, and makes us less dependent upon China. And it brings jobs back to America. That will grow the economy. Our proposal will also restore work requirements that ensure able-bodied adults without dependents earn a paycheck and learn new skills. That will grow our economy and help the supply chain. Right now, there are more job openings than people who are looking for jobs. You know why? It's in part because the Biden administration weakened work requirements. Incentives matter. And the incentives today are out of whack. It's time to get Americans back to work. Don't believe anyone who says our plans hurt American social safety net. We're a very generous nation. And when people fall on tough times, we'll help them. That will not change. But this is important. Assistance programs are supposed to be temporary, not permanent. A hand up, not a handout. A bridge to independence, not a barrier. Just as Ronald Reagan understood the importance of economic growth, we should welcome and celebrate the benefits of strong, growing economy. For with a strong, growing economy, we will no longer be dependent upon China. We will no longer be victims to inflation. And we can protect and preserve Social Security and Medicare. My fellow Americans, as we confront the consequences of President Biden's extreme, reckless spending, congressional Republicans are ready to act and to lead. That is the resolve to the House Republican majority, every single one of them.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy speaking at the New York Stock Exchange today. You can see more from the event at cspan.org. Speaker McCarthy's comments on the debt ceiling got quick reaction from the Democrats. Here's Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
All right, look, one thing is clear from this morning's theater at the New York Stock Exchange. Democrats want to avoid defaulting on our country's debts. Meanwhile, Speaker McCarthy continues to bumble our country towards a catastrophic default, which would cause the economy to crash, cause monumental job loss, and drastically raise costs for the American people. He went all the way to Wall Street and gave us no more details, no more facts, no new information at all. I'll be blunt. If Speaker McCarthy continues in this direction, we are headed to default. The main way we've avoided default in the past is to avoid and reject brinksmanship and hostage-taking, and instead work together in a bipartisan way. Speaker McCarthy, in his speech, invoked President Reagan. Ronald Reagan was never as reckless as Speaker McCarthy is being. Ronald Reagan said, "Debt ceiling brinksmanship threatens the holders of government bonds and those who rely on Social Security and veterans benefits. The United States has a special responsibility to itself and the world to meet its obligations." Speaker McCarthy, you said you wanted to go to the stock exchange because Reagan did? Well, listen to what he said. Listen to what he said. And despite the Speaker's stated concerns about costs, nothing would do more to raise costs for American families than an unnecessary Republican default crisis. Speaker McCarthy should know that when you insist on attaching things to the debt ceiling, something President Trump never did, and which Republicans under Trump never did, you risk a catastrophic default. Speaker McCarthy insists on cuts. Well, there's a time to discuss what kind of cuts folks are looking for or taxes they want to raise. It's called a budget. It shouldn't be part of this conversation. That kind of discussion, the cuts, belongs in a discussion about the budget, not as a precondition for avoiding default. To date, after countless requests, Speaker McCarthy has yet to produce any concrete plan as to the cuts he would make. One that details the specific cuts he wants and that has the support of 218 Republicans in the House. Democrats have called on Speaker McCarthy over and over and over. Show us your plan. I think you've heard me say that before.
With both sides looking unwilling to budge on a debt ceiling increase, Senator Schumer was asked about his plans if an agreement can't be reached.
Plain and simple, as it's been done in the past 3 times under President Trump, under President Biden, Democrats and Republicans came together, bipartisan, and avoided default with no preconditions, no brinksmanship. That's what's going to happen. That's what should happen. That's the best thing to happen.
And is it a
Yes.
discharge petition in
Yes.
the House?
No.
Do you expect to wait for Speaker McCarthy to see what he's going to do in the House on this, or do you expect to move a bill in the Senate on a parallel track, given that time?
Well, you know, we still, the bottom line is we're waiting to see McCarthy's plan. That's the next step. He's the one who's holding up us avoiding default because he says he wants cuts. Show us your plan. I think it's a mistake to do that to begin with. As I said, so did Donald Trump. So did Ronald Reagan. But if he wants to do it, he has an obligation to show his plan. That's the next step. Chad.
Thank you. If he puts through his plan, he puts forth his plan, gets a vote on this, as he promises to do in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that is their plan. Will you then receive that, even though there's a lot of things
Well,
in
let's
that
see,
you won't agree
let's
with?
first see the plan, and second see if he can get his 218 votes. Got to see what it is.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking earlier today. House Minority Leader Hakim Jeffries is also pushing back on Speaker McCarthy's speech. His spokesperson Christine Stevenson told the Washington Examiner today, quote, "Extreme MAGA Republicans continue to treat the full faith and credit of the United States as a hostage situation, while their so-called budget proposal remains in the Witness Protection Program. As always, we will evaluate any legislative text when and if House Republicans can ever agree with themselves on how much they want to devastate American families in order to finance tax cuts for the wealthy, well-off, and well-connected." That's a statement from the office of House Minority Leader Hakim Jeffries. The House is back this week following their Easter Passover break. A number of bills are on their agenda, including one on the U.S. response to Chinese spy balloons. Later in the week, members will vote on whether to override President Biden's veto of a waterways rule repeal. They'll also debate a measure to ban transgender student athletes from playing girls' team sports. The Senate also back in. Members will consider the nomination of Rhoda Plum to be Deputy Defense Undersecretary, and they'll continue work on legislation to extend federal programs, providing local fire departments with grants for training, equipment, and staffing. Today also marked the return for 2 familiar Senate faces. One, Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman. He's back following treatment for clinical depression. And Republican leader Mitch McConnell. He returned to the floor following a nearly 6 weeks absence after suffering a concussion from a fall. Here are his leader time remarks.
Mr. President.
You're recognized.
It's good to be back. I want to thank all my colleagues for their warm wishes shared over the past few weeks. Suffice it to say, this wasn't the first time that being hard-headed has served me very well. We're truly lucky and blessed to get to serve in this remarkable institution, represent our home state, and serve our country. And needless to say, I'm very happy to be back. There's important business for Congress to tackle, We should be working to undo this administration's mistakes. We need to secure the border, reduce crime, fight inflation, and invest in America's strength and our security. On an even more basic level, President Biden and his administration are literally on the clock to negotiate a debt ceiling solution with Speaker McCarthy and the Republican majority over in the House. The president's economic advisors say the deadline for a solution is not far off. But his political advisors apparently think the White House position should be, listen to this, no talks and no reforms. This extreme position is not even holding up in their own party. Even Washington Democrats are breaking ranks from the administration's position of no talks and no reforms. One of our Senate Democratic colleagues wrote an entire Washington Post op-ed calling on the president to sit down with Congress and reform spending. Reports indicate that a whole group of House Democrats are already talking about negotiations and about compromise. Just a few years ago, the Democratic leader, Leader Schumer, said this about the debt ceiling: it gives another ample opportunity for bipartisanship, not for one party jamming its choices down the throat of the other, end quote. So President Biden does not get to stick his fingers in his ears and refuse to listen, talk, or negotiate. And the American people know that. The White House needs to stop wasting time and start negotiating with the Speaker of the House.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell's leader time remarks, his first following a nearly 6-week absence after suffering a concussion from a fall. One senator still remains out of action. That's California Democrat Dianne Feinstein, who continues to recover from shingles. And her absence has caused a bit of a logjam on approving President Biden's judicial nominations. Here's Senator Schumer responding to a question about that from NBC News' Garrett Hake.
On Senator Feinstein, do you have any more clarification about when she might return? And if not, walk us through what the process would look like to put a temporary replacement on judiciary. Republicans have indicated they don't want to make that easy.
Okay, well, look, I spoke to Senator Feinstein just a few days ago. She believes she will return soon. She's very hopeful of that, and so am I.
What about this idea of
she's
temporary
hopeful of
replacement
return.
on
She's hopeful on returning soon. We think the Republicans should allow a temporary replacement till she returns.
Does that put this on
Yes,
the
yes,
agenda?
yes,
Senator,
yes.
Is there any
you're
indication of who that might be? Is there a senator that
I'll have to
that?
talk to my caucus.
Does that mean you will not move forward with trying to replace her until you've given her more time to
Well, as I-
comment?
look,
And are
lem-
you confident that you can get 9 Republicans to support that?
Well, let me just say, as I said, I spoke to her. She's hopeful she's going to return soon. I am hopeful she's going to return soon. We should have a temporary replacement until she does, and we hope Republicans will join us in that.
Now, Democrats will need 60 votes to replace Senator Feinstein. That's because 2 Republicans, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee and John Cornyn of Texas, have already said they will block any unanimous consent request to fill the seat. Here's Senator Cornyn's statement earlier on the floor.
The majority leader, it's reported, is expected to ask for some personnel changes in the Senate. Senator Feinstein, our colleague from California, has been out for a couple of months due to some health issues, not an uncommon occurrence here in the Senate. And I know the entire Senate joins me in wishing her a quick recovery and a speedy return here to the Senate. But given the tight margins in this chamber, her absence has created some complications for Senator Schumer within the Senate Judiciary Committee, on which I serve. Without her vote, our Democratic colleagues are simply unable to advance the most controversial and partisan judicial nominees that the president has selected. Given the lack of Republican support, these partisan nominees simply cannot move to the Senate floor for a vote. To get around the issue, Senator Schumer has come up with a unique proposal. He wants to temporarily replace Senator Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee. The idea is to remove her from the committee for an unspecified period of time, name a replacement, and then reinstate Senator Feinstein when she returns. This is, it turns out, unprecedented. Over the years, senators from both sides, as I indicated a moment ago, have needed time away due to various health issues. Never, not once, have we allowed temporary substitutes on committees, and now is not the time to start. Republicans are not going to break this precedent in order to bail out Senator Schumer or the Biden administration's most controversial nominees. Yesterday evening, the majority leader said he spoke with Senator Feinstein, and she hopes she will be back soon. We all hope that she comes back soon. But it's another reason not to go along with Senator Schumer's ploy for temporary appointment to a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Feinstein has been a mainstay of this body for more than 3 decades, and I hope to see her back in these halls soon. But until then, President Biden's most controversial partisan judicial nominees will have to wait.
Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn on the floor earlier today. Senator Blackburn said on Twitter, quote, "I will not go along with Chuck Schumer's plan to replace Senator Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee and pack the court with activist judges. Joe Biden wants the Senate to rubber stamp his unqualified and controversial judges to radically transform America." That's a statement from Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn. You're listening to Washington Today.
Live Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, a Supreme Court oral argument in a case involving religious accommodation at the workplace. A former Postal Service worker from Pennsylvania, who's an evangelical Christian, says he was punished for not working Sundays. Supreme Court case is Groff v. DeJoy. Live Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio. Listen anywhere on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. A group of Republicans are calling on House and Senate leaders to bar lawmakers from using the social media app TikTok. News of the letter was first reported by Politico. It reads in part, quote, "We urge you to amend the House and Senate rules to bar members of Congress from continued use of TikTok, even after the March 23, 2023 hearing, in which it became blatantly clear to the public that the China-based app is mining data and potentially spying on American citizens. Members of Congress continue to utilize the app to communicate with their constituents." North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis and Texas Representative Dan Crenshaw were the lead signers on the letter. They were joined by 15 other Republicans. It was sent to the leaders of the Rules and Administration Committees in both chambers. The Massachusetts Air National Guardsman, who is accused of leaking classified documents on the internet, was officially charged in U.S. District Court in Boston today. And here in Washington, the Pentagon is still reviewing how the leak happened and what it can do to stop future breaches. And a Russian judge has given activist Vladimir Kara-Murza the longest sentence an opposition figure has ever received in Russia since the war in Ukraine began. We'll hear what his wife, Evgenia, has to say about it coming up. In New York City today, the House Judiciary Committee held a field hearing, the purpose of which was, according to a committee press release, a look at Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's, quote, pro-crime, anti-victim policies. Here's Committee Chair Jim Jordan.
For the District Attorney, justice isn't blind. It's about looking for opportunities to advance a political agenda, a radical political agenda. Rather than enforcing the law, the DA is using his office to do the bidding of left-wing campaign funders. He's taken a soft-on-crime approach to the real criminals. One of Mr. Bragg's first actions upon taking office in January of 2022 was to put out a memo that directed his assistant district attorneys not to prosecute certain crimes, including trespassing and resisting arrest. The memo also stated that armed robberies should not be prosecuted as felonies. Instead, they were to be considered as misdemeanor larceny unless someone was shot during the course of the robbery. Thank goodness, after a backlash from police groups and the public, Mr. Bragg agreed to prosecute some robberies as felonies, but left the rest of the memo in place. The president of NYPD Detectives Endowment Association said, quote, "Bragg gives criminals the roadmap to freedom from prosecution and control of our streets. In Bragg's Manhattan, you can resist arrest, deal drugs, obstruct arrest, and even carry a gun to get away with it. And guess what happened under this new policy? More crime. In 2022, Mr. Bragg's first year as district attorney, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes. Felony assaults rose 13%, robberies spiked 26%, burglaries in New York City went up 23%, grand larcenies were up 26%, and auto theft increased 32%. Transit crime surged nearly 30%. Imagine that. You leave criminals on the street, you get more crime. Patrick Lynch, the president of the Police Benevolent Association, said, "Police officers don't want to be sent out to enforce laws that the district attorneys won't prosecute. There are already too many people who believe that they can commit crimes, resist arrest, interfere with police officers, and face zero consequences."
House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan. The judiciary hearing was held at the Jacob Javits Federal Building in Lower Manhattan. That's just around the corner from the courthouse where District Attorney Bragg charged former President Donald Trump with 34 felony counts just 2 weeks ago. NewYork1.com called the hearing, quote, "the latest move by Republicans who are upset with Donald Trump's indictment and an escalation in their war on the prosecutor who charged him." Here's Judiciary Ranking Member Jerry Nadler.
Let me be very clear. We are here today in Lower Manhattan for one reason and one reason only. The chairman is doing the bidding of Donald Trump. Committee Republicans designed this hearing to intimidate and deter the duly elected district attorney of Manhattan from doing the work his constituents elected him to do. They have demanded access to the inner workings of an ongoing criminal case, information to which they know they are not entitled. They have subpoenaed a witness who used to work for the district attorney, whom they know cannot answer their questions. And they have earned a lawsuit that risks future congressional oversight as a result. They have perpetuated the anti-Semitic and racist tropes that Mr. Trump has directed at both the prosecutor and the judge in this case. They are using their public offices and the resources of this committee to protect their political patron, Donald Trump. It is an outrageous abuse of power. It is, to use the chairman's favorite term, a weaponization of the House Judiciary Committee. I do not know if Mr. Trump will be found guilty.
Gentlemen, suspend. The gallery should refrain from commenting and let the gentleman from New York finish his statement. Gentleman is recognized.
I do not know if Mr. Trump will be found guilty by a jury of his peers here in New York, or for that matter in Georgia or in Washington, D.C. on charges that may follow, but I do know that he will have his day in court. Using this committee to undermine that process as it unfolds is cynical, unethical, and given the violence unleashed on the Capitol by the former president, just plain dangerous. Now, we all grieve for the victims of violent crime, here in Manhattan and everywhere. But it is shameful that the Republicans of this committee would use the pretext of violent crime as an excuse to play tourist in New York and bully the district attorney. And it is particularly disgraceful that they would use this pretext after doing nothing to stop the gun violence that terrorizes our nation. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been at least 146 mass shootings this year alone. That means there have been more mass shootings than days so far this year.
That's Judiciary Ranking Member Jerry Nadler. And here's NBC News senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong talking about the politics and timing around today's hearing.
This hearing, led by Jim Jordan, one of Donald Trump's foremost allies on Capitol Hill, is a field hearing looking into what he and Republicans say is the rampant crime issue. They're focused on victims of violent crime in Manhattan itself. Of course, there are no coincidences in politics, and these Republicans find themselves in Manhattan today because of the investigation, the prosecution of the former president, Donald Trump, led by Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney. This is related, of course, as we have all been following the hush money scheme related to payments to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And so Jordan and other Republicans are trying to make the case today, just in a few minutes, that Alvin Bragg has taken his eye off the ball, that he has been focused too much on Donald Trump and not enough on prosecuting crime in New York City and specifically Manhattan.
Democrats have taken the stance in other field hearings. You know, they said they're political, we're not going to participate, but they're taking a different posture on this hearing. They said they are going to go and try to push back and challenge this Republican narrative, not just about DA Bragg, but about crime. What do you expect to hear from Democrats?
Well, in fact, Jerry Nadler, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, probably as we speak, is holding a press conference at that very federal building, the Javits Federal Building, along with Mayor Eric Adams, pushing back on this narrative that crime is out of control. They're going to point to statistics from Q1 just this year that showed that year over year, violent crime has actually fallen in some really key categories, including murders and shootings and other violent crime. And so this will be, a line that you hear from Democrats as the hearing proceeds later today. Chuck Schumer, meanwhile, has been pushing back. He, of course, the Democrat from New York and the majority leader of the Senate, has been pushing back in his own way, challenging Jim Jordan and other Republicans, and specifically Kevin McCarthy, to say that they will distance themselves from some words that former President Trump has uttered himself, which is defund the FBI, defund DOJ. Schumer's point is you can't say that you are against crime if you are calling for the defunding of federal agencies that go after crime and prosecute crime.
And I also wanted to know, what do you think? There have been several recent high-profile mass shootings. Louisville, Kentucky had 2 in the series of a week. There's the mass shooting at a Sweet 16 in Alabama. I can show AL.com. 4 people were killed, 28 injured. And the list goes on, as we know. It's relatively common in America. Do you think Democrats might take this opportunity, to say, if you want to talk about crime, let's talk about it? Do you think that might be something that Democrats also push as they push back on Republican narratives around crime in major cities?
Absolutely. And you have heard from the President Joe Biden, every time one of these mass shootings occur, and they are occurring, it seems, almost every other day now, that he has been calling on Republicans to help Democrats pass a ban on assault weapons. That has been a response. We have also seen, Tia, that a number of politicians, high-profile politicians, the governor of Tennessee, the governor of Kentucky, personally lost friends in these mass shootings in their own states. These are red states, of course. All 3 of the ones that we've mentioned here are red states. And now we have high-profile politicians who have lost personal family friends in these mass shootings. There was a recent study, I think, that showed that a high number of Americans have been impacted in some way by gun violence, whether that was being a victim of gun violence themselves, or knowing somebody who was a victim of gun violence, or suicide. And so that seems to be more and more common. I think we all know people who either have been impacted themselves, or we ourselves have been impacted in some way from gun violence. And that number just seems to be growing and growing.
NBC News senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see more from that segment, and see more on the week ahead in Washington at cspan.org/Washington Journal and the C-SPAN Now video app. Jack Teixeira, the Massachusetts Air National Guardsman accused of leaking classified documents on the internet, appeared in U.S. District Court in Boston today. He was officially charged with violating the Espionage Act. and another law that prohibits the unauthorized removal of classified documents. He faces a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. And today, the Pentagon said it expects findings within 45 days from its review of the leak. Here's more from Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh.
Am I right in understanding that you cannot say at this point that the leak is definitely contained?
I mean, we're still reviewing it. It's still an ongoing effort here in this department. This is a criminal investigation. So again, the Department of Justice has the lead on that. So I would refer you to the Department of Justice.
And given the ongoing efforts to review and look at who has access to this kind of information, can you give us a sense of how many people have had their access restricted based on the efforts you've taken so far to review distribution lists and printing abilities and that sort of?
Yeah, so I can't give you exact numbers on like who has had access revoked, but what I can say is that we are culling through some of our distribution lists and who has access to certain information. That effort is going to be ongoing. It's not just going to stop tomorrow and it's not going to stop after a week. This is going to be a long-term effort. And so while I can't give you exact numbers, we are taking steps when it comes to exactly what you said, when it comes to distribution lists, when it comes to printing access, when it comes to just access within SCIFs. We have to make sure that the service members or our civilians have what they need to be able to do their job. But it also we need to make sure that it is on a need-to-know basis. Yeah. Matt, sorry. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I wanted to see if you could say anything more about those efforts. When you say you're culling through distribution lists, and you talk about a need-to-know, is that process meant to determine, someone who might have had a need-to-know at one point and been part of a distribution list and had access to things, making sure that they still have that need? Is that part of the process? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's part of an ongoing review. I mean, a very simple example would be a distribution list that has 10 people on it, and one of those people have left the organization, but they moved within the department and still have that email. So it's culling through some of those lists, making sure that people that are sent information actually need to have that information to do their jobs. But part of what this department is focused on is making sure that people have the information that they need to do their jobs successfully and be able to defend our homeland and our interests abroad.
Okay. And can you say whether some of those efforts are already being made? Is it just you're reviewing those distribution lists, or have some actions already been taken to that end?
No, actions have already been taken.
Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh earlier today. You can see the entire briefing at cspan.org. Finally, Russian activist Vladimir Kara-Murza was sentenced today to 25 years in jail for charges linked to his criticism of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The 41-year-old Russian-British former journalist and politician is the latest of Russian President Vladimir Putin's opponents to have been arrested or forced to leave the country. And today, Vladimir Kara-Murza's wife, Evgenia, talked about her husband's sentencing and what he's been fighting for.
And Evgenia, let's start with you and your reaction to the sentencing. I'm going to read a moving tweet that you sent out this morning. A quarter of a century is an A+ for your courage, consistency, and honesty in your years-long work. I'm infinitely proud of you, my love, and I'm always by your side. What are your reactions?
My reaction is exactly what you read. I am very lucky to be sharing my life with someone I don't ever have to be ashamed of, with someone I'm always proud of, someone I deeply admire and deeply respect, someone who is serving as the best example to our kids. I'm a very lucky woman. And I understand that this sentence is the high recognition of the effectiveness of Vladimir's work. He has proven time and again that he would not back down, that he would not abandon his fight, that he would not betray his country and betray his ideals, that he would keep on fighting. And this sentence shows that there's so afraid of him, and they hate him so much for his consistency, for his courage, for his amazing bravery. They're so afraid of him, and they hate him so much that they want to lock him up for a quarter of a century.
What is this fight about?
A Russia that we all want to see.
And what Russia is that?
A Russia where human rights are being respected. A Russia where the government does not persecute its own citizens for opposing the official narrative. A country that does not represent a threat to its closest neighbors and to the world in general. A Russia, a free Russia, a democratic Russia. A Russia where our kids can live knowing that there is no risk to their lives or to the lives of their father, to the life of their father. This is a Russia that we all want to see, and this is the only Russia that will stop being a threat to itself and its neighbors.
Evgenia Kara-Murza, the wife of Russian activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, speaking with Washington Post editorial page editor David Shipley. You can see the entire event at cspan.org. That's also where you can find this program. You just go to our podcast page there, cspan.org/podcasts. You can also find it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, subscribe to our evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every morning, we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, pollster, author, and communications strategist Frank Luntz discusses Campaign 2024 and political news of the day. And then WWJ News Radio auto reporter Jeffrey Gilbert shares his views on the Biden administration's proposed emissions limit and push to increase electric vehicle sales. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.